And so Soren will now be in conversation with Sara Critchfield. Sara is the Vice President of Movement Building at the Fetzer Institute, where she is lead strategist and innovator for inspiring and serving the emergence of a spiritual movement towards personal and societal transformation. Wow. She was founding director of Upworthy, the fastest growing media site of all time. She has been a keynote speaker at the White House, and she truly has one of the most inspirational daily morning routines, and we found this out in our community over the last several weeks, which includes nothing unfun, U-N-F-U-N, for an entire hour every morning. So hey, there's some modeling for us all. So please welcome Soren and Sara.
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here.
It's really nice to be here.
Was this your first event in 2 years?
It is.
Like most of us?
Yeah.
Wow.
We're all in the same boat here.
Well, I want to talk about faith, and I also want to talk about building a spiritual foundation, for the world. Because both.
Great. On my mic or Soren's? Okay.
John, there's a request in the back that somebody in the front row can't hear us very well. Can people hear us in the back?
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful. So Sara, it's wonderful to have you. Hopefully everybody can hear us now. But let's talk about faith first. It's interesting. I grew up in a very Christian community in Texas. And so I kind of remember and we were kind of non-Christian. We were like more Buddhist. And I remember as a kid growing up, there was I was in that conversation from age I remember 4 or 5. It was always I'm kind of brought into this whole question of what's my faith? I remember asking my mom and dad, do we have a faith? Are we Christians? Are we Buddhists? What are we? And I'm curious your own journey with faith and what kind of brought you to your own spiritual journey and how faith has been kind of a part of that.
Great,
is that
thanks.
something that was young in you?
Yeah.
Or is that something emerged older? And what's the role that Christianity plays? So.
Good. I want to spend a minute on this.
Please.
Because of this crowd, but I'm one of those people on those Pew polls that identify as highly spiritual and highly religious. My spiritual identity is Christian, and I was raised in a small town in Ohio. My mother was a pastor. My mother was the pastor, and my father was marketing exec. And so I am the literal love child of religion and marketing, and my tagline is "Love needs better marketing." That's sort of been my passion. And that's really led me into spending most of my career in social movements. So right out of college, I went to DC, and I was working in the interfaith scene in DC, mostly on global poverty, because Jesus wants us to, I felt very strongly that's what Jesus wanted us to do as Christians, and it was a lovely scene working with a very explicit faith lens, with other people working with explicit faith lenses. And I would say I've had 3 major questions in my career so far that have really driven me and shaped and formed my behavior. And the first one was, how do laws change? Because that's how I felt like we were going to make things better for people on the ground. And when you get to DC, you realize very quickly laws aren't changing because there's no political will there. So it moved me into this second question of how do minds change? How does political will get built? And so I teamed up with some folks at Move On, and we got funded by Chris Hughes, Facebook co-founder. And we started a little media startup called Upworthy with the mission to change what the world pays attention to make social justice just as viral as cat videos, right? And so we were going to grab the attention and put it to different ends.
Positive action.
For social justice, right. And it was really successful. We gained a 50 million user base in a year. So for all of you who have been on that rocket ship, that startup rocket ship of 0 to 50 million in a year, I feel that I was on that rocket ship. And what happened to me personally at that point was my faith went in the closet. I was a person of faith that went in the closet. And I'm just so curious.
It went in the closet because you're too busy, or because you thought the people around you wouldn't accept you?
Oh, that's a great question. Upworthy was explicitly secular, right? So I came from this explicitly religious scene to this explicitly secular scene. And what I told myself was, it doesn't matter. It's all the same thing. It doesn't matter. The means are the same, and so the ends aren't what's important. And so I put my faith in the closet, and if it ever came up, people would say to me, wait, you're a Christian? You don't seem like a Christian. And I think what they meant was, I honestly think what they meant, Soren, is you don't seem like you hate gay people. Because, this becomes a divide in, at Upworthy, we were very focused on, this was pre-Supreme Court decision for marriage equality, and we were putting out an enormous amount of content that was quite anti-religious in nature, specifically anti-religious in nature, in support of our LGBTQ siblings, of which I am in full support because I'm a Christian.
Right.
And so there was this disconnect in the people that I was working with, in the place that I was working in. I had to put my faith in the closet only because I just didn't know what to do with. I didn't know how to answer that question.
Yeah.
You don't seem like a Christian. I was scared. I remember having a really specific moment where I felt this intuitive moment that I could. And remember, I was head of product. I was leading the editorial team. And I could have managed and said, in our product, we will not denigrate faith traditions while we do our work, right? And there was no need for that. But I didn't.
Wow.
And so this created this kind of violence inside of myself. I don't know if any of you experienced some of this sort of disintegration of my faith, my spirituality, my beliefs, in this work environment.
You have to exile one of them, right?
Sure.
It feels like you have to put one away.
So it disintegrates you, right? It literally takes you from an integrated place to a disintegrated place. And so I never did sort of figure out how to integrate while I was there. And of course, all great startups, I had a spectacular startup, spectacular burnout. And as I was sort of recovering, what I started really, another question kind of started forming, which was, okay, I've thought about how laws work and how minds change and all this stuff, but my questioning was what we were doing there, was the means to the end, causing deeper division, right? Were we getting a great outcome in justice while deepening division and hatred in the global human family? And what did it do to me, inside of me, to work on that product? And so I really started thinking about how does love work, not only in the world, because all my work had been externally focused, but how's it working in me? This was in 2016, and so I really had to say am I able to have love in my heart for someone who voted differently than me this time around? And so what I did is I went all the way back to my tradition, to my roots, and I went back to seminary.
Wow.
And I was going to get a master's of divinity and become a pastor, like my mama. And while I was sort of in that path, I got called by a place called Fetzer. I'd never heard of the Fetzer Institute. And it turns out they were asking the same questions I was asking, which is, how does love grow? And so the relief from going from how do users grow to how does love grow, and knowing there were other people asking this question, and in a way that at scale also, right? But that the question was a different primary question. So I decided to kind of team up with Fetzer and explore that. It's been a year and a half. I'm the VP of Movement Building, and the mission is, to help build a spiritual foundation for a loving world, which at this point in my life, and again, particularly because of my rootedness and my faith tradition, there is no other question to be asking for me.
Beautiful.
So.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
That's my.
Thank you.
But we all have that.
Yeah, and so how do you think we talk about faith without creating an other?
Yeah.
So two people meet in this as, well, I'm a Buddhist, or you're a Christian, and there's often that feeling of well, I have to, and then there's this spiritual but not religious, and so there's all these kind of orientations, if you will. What do you think we can engage with that so that our stories, we don't have to say somebody, you don't look like a whatever to me, because we're not caught up in our perceptions or our stories. We're actually just connected as a human being to human being.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious how, and it's not an easy question, I don't think, but what do you feel like we can move beyond this sense of othering to a sense more of like shared values and shared humanity?
I mean, that's so in my heart. I'm glad you asked that question. One of the things that Fetzer does really well is ask questions. We don't answer them well, because some of the questions we're asking are about sacred mystery, and none of us really can answer those questions fully, but we're all really equipped to ask them. And so one of the questions we're asking is like, how do you build this spiritual foundation for a loving world? And what we're very confident about at Fetzer is that we cannot do it without the entire global human family. And so what we know to be true is there's a big tent. There's different ways of knowing that are valid, legitimate, and needed. And so there's scientific ways of knowing, of sense-making in our world. And there's spiritual ways of knowing and sense-making. And there's religious ways of knowing and sense-making. And there's this large tent of the whole global human family. And what's really painful is when there's infighting under that tent, right? Yeah. Because it's like we're not seeing each other as complementary ways of knowing. We're seeing each other as competitors, and we're not competitors. There is no competition between scientific ways of knowing or spiritual religion ways of knowing. So I think that we have a bit of work to do. I think that the faith community, the religious community, and the spiritual but not religious who keenly, think about identifying yourself about what you're not, right? What if I called myself what if we did that in our political communities? I'm Republican, not Democrat. It's like, how much more divisive does that sound? Right? So it's very curious. A lot of the moves, a lot of the trends we're seeing in this country out of religious structures and into spiritual, not religious structures, it's like this pendulum swing. It's almost like a reaction against, right? And what I want to say is, particularly if that's been your journey, it is healthy and good to move away from abusive and life-denying oppressive forces, and you should do that, right? But some of the problem that happens is that in moving away from some oppression, what we do is we sort of want to cut it out and get it away from us, right? We want to and so we want to say, well, I'm not that. I'm not you. Right. In doing so, what that does is it drops that piece of us down into the shadow side, right? And so I think there's a micro piece of this and there's a macro piece of this. That this might be, there's some personal journeys with this, and they're in different places, and you need to attend to your need to be where you are in your personal. But the macro journey here is that as we make this shift as the global human family, we cannot cut out what came before. We have got to walking the spiritual path is transcend and include, right? So,
transcend and include, that's good. So, but then why even mention what it's kind of like if I met you and I'm a spaghetti eater, and you're like, I'm not a spaghetti eater. All of a sudden we have different, we just don't talk, who cares? So maybe is part of the faith-based conversation just not talking about it? And what's the relevance of defining ourselves as something, whether it's a spaghetti eater, not spaghetti eater, or Christian or Buddhist?
Oh, it's so human.
And I know for a lot of people, it's an honoring of them to say that. And I'm curious, how we can navigate that world where it's honoring of me to say that, even though from an outside perspective, it's like, there's all these things we have in common. Let's just talk about what we have in common. And as soon as I set up myself as this, it invites this other person to be like, well, as soon as I say, I'm not a Buddhist per se, but if I say I'm Buddhist, all of a sudden the people around me who aren't Buddhists probably have a tendency to feel like, other. And I think that feeling of other is so interesting. And can faith and religion and spirituality or whatever get us to that moment of non-other while honoring the differences?
Right. No, exactly. It's called a diversity within a solidarity of love. It's kind of the terminology you would use in the interfaith scene. And I think it's really important to honor our diversity and our identities. But I do think bringing an awareness, right? We just walk with an awareness of how is that really recognizing the whole global human family in the big tent versus, I mean, there is space to be diverse and different. I am a Christian. I love that identity. I wear it proud, and probably always will. And that's important for me to do sense making in the world, in my journey. So,
and following the teachings of Jesus as a guide to your life gives you that
the infrastructure,
ability.
the rituals, the practices. These have been passed on to me through relationship, deep relationship with my family, with my communities, my teachers. So I have to identify in that way while holding, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, while holding an identity as a global citizen that recognizes that this division doesn't necessarily put me in conflict with other ways of sense making and knowing. Can I talk about a piece of work Fetzer's doing on this line?
Yes.
Okay.
So what is Fetzer doing?
Fetzer's doing this really interesting piece of work called Sharing Spiritual Heritage. And it's pulling together folks from within faith traditions and without faith traditions that are thinking really deeply, and I think this is kind of relevant to the mindfulness technology space. They're just thinking really deeply about how to, apply ancient wisdom in today's time in ways that work for people, in ways that work for their tribes, their folks, but honors that lineage, So, so there's been some religious appropriation in some of this, sort of like pulling something out of a context of a religious tradition, repackaging it and handing it to a consumer. That would be religious appropriation. And I think what we want to, and I don't think that these practices and sacred traditions can't change and morph and be served in new ways, but how do we bring awareness about our lineage and our spiritual heritage? Again, you have a personal religious or spiritual lineage, but then the global human family also does. So all of the questions we're asking at this conference, how do we help people? What's a good life? How do we treat each other? How do we bring our inner peace, and then how does that affect outer peace? World religions have been the major containers that have held these, the sense making that we've done this in community for millennia, right? And so I think instead of sort of leaving, discounting, we find ourselves in a present moment in which we have one hand in the past and one hand in the future, right? And this is in many places in our lives. I was raised by parents. I am now raising a child. I am in the middle, and I am thinking through, what am I kind of passing on? How am I changing, making it better so that then she can do the same? We're in an arc. We're in a long arc. It's a long game, what we're doing. So I just, anyway, this piece about lineage, about tradition, heritage, how do we get back in touch with this, reroute this? I think BIPOC communities are doing fantastic work around this right now, around remembering and healing. And so I think it would be a really interesting sort of challenge and work for people working in technology spaces that are really on the forefront of sort of like repackaging and representing some deep ancient wisdom and traditions, and to just have a growing awareness that there's a thread that was long before.
And I really love, the Dalai Lama said his true religion is kindness, and I really love this fact of like that is there a love practice that we can all remember. So when we meet, we're like, well, I'm a Buddhist, you're a Christian, but we're all love. Like there's an and there that unites. Yeah. And I'm curious, like, is that how do you see the role of love? How do we manifest it? How is it supported? How does it show itself in more situations? Because it feels like that's kind of the heart of most of what everything gets, the essence of a lot of the true religions or faith-based came from a love of easing suffering and healing and helping. And I look at the life that Jesus lived, and that feels like that was such forgiveness, love, helping the poor. Like it was like that caring heart. And I'm curious how that can show up more in our world, and how you orient towards that. Do you have a practice in the morning or prayer, or how do you kind of rekindle that?
Oh, that was a lot of questions.
That was a lot of questions. Take anyone you want.
Take anyone I want. I mean, at Fetzer, I guess if there's a bottom line to spirituality and faith, it's love, I guess, is one way to say that, for sure. There's also this, like, sacred mystery in how this works, right? There's a sacred mystery around, so I can't sort of say, well, Soren, here are the top 3 ways of making a more loving world, but what I think is most helpful is the question you're asking yourself. And I do think that question forms and shapes our activity in the world. And so wherever you're at, there is an opportunity to switch your question, to really think through, do these means justify these ends? Because oftentimes in tech space, we're all working towards the same end. I know every single person in this room wants a more loving world, a more just world, a more peaceful world, more kindness. And so really bringing awareness to what are the side effects of what we're producing in the world. For me, it's really about the awareness piece. And if your question is, John Fetzer actually said, I don't know what you all will do, but I do know that the sum will be unconditional love. And so we're always asking ourselves that question at Fetzer, and it has, even just in the short 1.5 years I've been there, it has shaped and formed me in such a different way in how I behave and act and move through the world. So I guess it's like, what's the tech industry's question? And predominantly, it is, how do we get more users? Like, how do users grow?
Right.
It's a great question. It's a fun one. But what if it was, how does love grow?
Yeah.
What if it was, how does love grow? And what if your question was, how does love grow? And what if your question was, how does love grow? And what would that produce?
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And so when you think of your own practice, is that something that you come back to, or how do you navigate putting that as almost like on the front stage, if you will, or prioritizing that?
Yeah, prioritizing that. I think that what we spend our time doing at work is a big deal for putting what we value, because we spend most of our time at work. Annie said every morning I spend an hour doing nothing unfun. So if meditation feels unfun to me, I don't do it. Or if checking the stock market feels fun to me, that's what I do. Sometimes I journal, sometimes I cry, sometimes I pray. It's just, sometimes I walk outside or drink coffee.
But it has to be fun.
It has to be fun. It has to be fun, because a spirituality without joy is thin.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
So giving ourselves a break, and and then I have a deep Christian practice. I am involved in a community, a local Christian community, and I walk with them. And I think one of the things I would say in mindfulness tech that is the most the biggest question I have is how the great spiritual and religious traditions have always been passed down through story, through community.
Yeah.
So I have questions about like the community aspect, the communal aspect. Tech drives us into individualism, it just drives us down into it. And so being mindful about my tech use, as we all are, and then trying to ask a question of like, does this enhance my connectivity to people, or is it really driving me into, and sometimes, so you have to be really honest with yourself, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I love us all leaving and holding this kind of question of, how does love grow, and how does it grow internal? How do we increase the love users? And how does it grow both inside our own hearts, and then how does it grow in the world? And trusting, whether it's a faith-based religion or whatever avenue, whatever road gets us there. That's I think a beautiful thing to end with. So thank you so much for sharing that and holding that space.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.